Citizens of the world, welcome back to the Keep Yours podcast, where we try and keep a few extra dollars in your wallet and educate you on some of the things you might need to know about. And today we are going to, in my mind, beat a dead horse, but obviously one that needs to be beaten up a little bit. And that is on government regulations and business and loss of unintended consequences. Now, for those who have followed my podcast for a long time, unintended consequences from government action is no big surprise. It keeps happening, and this week I got this article on why corporations won't hire remote workers in Colorado, and one of my friends sent it to me and said, hey, do you know about this new Colorado law? You run a small business in Colorado. Are you even aware of this? And I wasn't at all. Didn't even know it existed. So I went and did a little research to see what are we talking about and why. But first, let's start with the article from Vice, Vice News, why corporations won't hire remote workers in Colorado. And I'm going to bring this up as a PDF because it's a little bit easier to go through. All right, here's the example. And here's just the beginning of the article. This is where it starts. So, companies are excluding Coloradans from consideration for remote work positions in an effort to avoid compliance with a state law aimed at increasing transparency around pay inequalities. Okay, so on the outsource on the first look at this, it looks like you say, oh, okay, well, companies aren't paying women equal as men. They should fix that problem. Right, and they should be transparent about it. Right, that's what it seems like. But let's just start with the example here. And they're saying must be, the job state must be capable of working remotely from the central Midwestern U.S. This role cannot be performed in Colorado. Right, so they're specifically excluding Colorado residents from applying for these jobs because they have to deal with Colorado law. Right. Now, what's interesting is you get to the end of this article and it basically says, companies are showing that they would rather rule out job candidates from an entire state rather than comply with a law intended to close the pay gap and increase transparency about pay and benefits. Okay, so let's say intended, right? But then let's actually go look at the data. And one of my last podcasts was we have a data problem in America. We don't understand how to synthesize and look at data, and we can't wrap our head around these things that we've been told that are not true, right? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is let's go look at the law in Colorado, right? Okay, so this is the actual law from Senate Bill 19-0-5. It tells us the senators who, obviously don't understand this, but at least they're going to give us a little bit of their why. Okay, so the idea behind that is that they're saying, despite Equal Pay Act law of 1963, i.e., the law already exists on the books that you must pay people the same wage for doing the same job. Right? That's what the law says already. So instead, we're going to put in another law, this one. And we're doing it because women in the state earn just 86 cents on the dollar every men earn, right? So the assumption you jump to then is that women are doing the exact same job as men and paid 14% less money, right? Now, for anyone that runs a small business, this isn't going to make any sense, right? If you run a legal firm and you're telling me I can go start a law firm and I can hire women and pay them 14% less, drop 14% more profits to my bottom line because I don't have to pay wages, and hire all women, I am going to hire all women in an instant. But the women aren't going to stand for that. The women create their own law firms too. So this isn't what's actually happening, right? What's actually happening is men have different jobs than women, and men choose to do different things at their job than women do. So the pay gap is not 14% less money for the exact same amount of work. The pay gap is men do 14% more work and therefore are paid 14% more money. And you're going to go, oh, well, who are you, Mr. White Privileged Man? Okay, this is what you're saying. You don't understand what we're talking about. I'm going, okay, all right. Well, I never, ever give these things out as, here's my opinion because this or that, right? I don't know anything. Right? I am just a person on the planet trying to learn my best. But here's the thing. I always defer to the experts, right? What does the data actually say? Okay, so let's go find the experts. How about Harvard? Can we all agree that Harvard is not a right-leaning think tank that's going to tell us what Republicans would like us to hear and therefore completely biased against women and minorities? All right, we're talking about Harvard. Okay? So, Harvard does the study, right? And it says that female workers earn 89 cents even in a unionized workplace where tasks, wages, promotional schedules are identical for men and women by design, i.e., they set up the exactly perfect platform that Colorado is asking for, right? And still have a pay discrepancy, right? Even though it is completely 1,000%. I don't even know why I use 1,000. I don't need to exaggerate here. It's 100% equal. Okay? So if you do the same job, you get the same money, period. That's how it works. Okay. But why are the earnings different? Oh, they pulled all the time card data on bus and train operators to show that the earnings gap can be explained by female operators taking on average 1.5 fewer hours of overtime and 1.3 hours of unpaid time off per week than male operators. Female operators, especially those who have dependents, pursue schedule conventionality, predictability, and controllability more than male operators, i.e., they have to take care of their families. They're the primary family taker, and therefore we're not talking about less pay for less work. We're talking about the same pay for the same work. Men are just working more. If you work more than somebody else does, that is not a wage discrepancy. That is, you're paying the same thing, you're just doing less. If we brought this back to farming, and we went, okay, we are all equal in terms of when we walk out. We have the same amount of land, right? And I choose to farm every single acre of my land. On every single place that I can put a plant to grow, I put a plant to grow. I water all of them. I take care of all of them. The woman next door plants half of her field. Only half. Gets half of the crop. I get twice as much crop as the woman next door does because I planted twice as much field as she did. When we get to the end of the year, you don't say there is a grain discrepancy between men and women, where men get more grain than women do. No, you say if you plant twice as much crops, you get twice as much money. If you do twice as much work, you get twice as much money. And so what they show is that what's important to men and women is different. Women are more concerned with taking care of their families, providing for their families, and want schedules that accommodate those families more than men will do. So when somebody calls in sick and there's a shift to be covered, they ask all the employees who would like to take this shift. And more male employees will take a last-minute overtime shift than female ones. Why? Because they might have more flexible schedules, or they might be the primary breadwinner, or they might not be the primary breadwinner, but it might be that they're not as good as childcare, right? And now I know in our new non-binary world idea, we're supposed to believe that men are just as good as taking care of children as women, but I don't believe that for a half a second, right? Some men, sure. All men in general, better at child taking than the women who bear the children? I don't think so. Just like we can't breastfeed a child if we had to. If the child's life depended on it, no milk is coming out of my breast. I'm sorry, I can't do it, right? There are these differences that we have. Okay, so Harvard has basically dispelled this notion that women are making less than men, right? So I go back to the Colorado law and they go, oh, despite the policies outlawing discrimination, we still have it, right? And here's the effect. According to this research report, 2008, by the Institute for Women's Policy Research and the Women's Foundation of Colorado, women in the state earn just 86 cents for every dollar that men earn. So I've just shown you how that doesn't work, but we'll go to their study to show it to you, right? So here's their key findings, right? Women in Colorado have a median annual earnings of $43,000, which is 86 cents on the dollar compared to men who work full-time year-round. Okay, but that is not for the same job and not for the same amount of hours. Because again, if I'm running any professional firm, if I'm running any business, period, and I'm hiring men versus women, and women are 14% cheaper in the labor market, then I'm going to hire all women. And so if that was the case, then there would be all men looking for jobs because women are paid 14% less, and therefore all employers would hire all women first. So the other part of this study should conclude that women are getting more jobs than men, and men don't have jobs because women are paid less, because that would be the logical thing for an entrepreneur to do. But that's not what's happening, and that's not what we're talking about. Right? So they just want to do it based on earnings, right? Oh, and then part of their thing said that so you go down in their study and it said that some of men's earnings actually reduced, right? But they don't know why. Oh, but we think it's because possibly oil sector jobs reduced. All right, so oil sector jobs are down. So it's not the same job that a woman's being paid less. Women choose to do different jobs, again, based on a different priority set schedule than men. And if you do a different job, right? If a woman chooses to be a secretary in an office and a man chooses to go out on a boat and catch crab in Alaska, one is very dangerous and pays high, and another is not as dangerous and pays less. That does not mean the woman is being discriminated and paying less money for the same amount of work. What that means is a man has chosen to do a job that pays more money, right? And women could choose to do these same jobs. And if the woman's doing the same job and providing the same amount of output, i.e. the same amount of farming, right? Okay, so let's go back to the farming example. So I farm all of my crops, right? And I have twice as much than my woman neighbor next door because I planted all of my field and she only planted half, all right? All other things being equal. We all had the same access to capital. We all had the same access to water. But I decided I was going to plant my whole field. Now, to take care of that field, I was in the field 12 hours a day. My neighbor, only planting half the amount of field, was only in the field 6 hours per day because she decided she wanted her time to do other things. Whatever those other things will be, up to her. That's her personal decision to make. This is what liberty is, the freedom to make your own choices. So if I as a man decide not to work tomorrow, I'm not going to plant any of my field. My neighbor plants half of her field and the other neighbor plants all of her field. And so now we go, oh, wow. I get to the end of the year and I go, well, I want just as much as you guys have. You know, well, the woman who planted 100% of her field, she's got 10 bushels. And the woman who planted half of her field, she's got 5 bushels. And I decided not to plant anything this year and I have no bushels. But I want there to be equal bushels at the end of the year. Then I now have an incentive to do nothing. Right? So what are we going to say? We want men to be paid less and do less work? That's a terrible, terrible thing to say. No, we all get the decision to choose. And so, just like the Harvard study show, if you set up the perfect example where people must be paid the same, women are doing less work and therefore earning less wages, or choosing jobs that pay lower wages for the flexibility of family or for other reasons. Maybe they prefer to be a caretaker, right, of people rather than go mow lawns or go crab shrimp. Fish for crab or shrimp, right? Or do more dangerous things in oil fields, right? It's not that women can't do any of these jobs. They can do all of them, right? But they choose not to, right? So you can't say that a field worker working 90 hours a week should be paid as the same as a school teacher. That's not the same work. And so the assumption that we're making in here is that women are doing the exact same work and being paid less. And that's what this Colorado bill says, right? So if the wage gap were eliminated, well, okay, so you're either requiring men do less work or you're requiring women do more work. Which one? You're not going to get that ever because we want women to be taking care of our families. That's what we want. So the pay gap disparity has basically been completely disproved, right? Because, again, as I said, if I could start a firm and hire all women and literally pay them 14% less, then I would do that. And women aren't stupid. You're talking women lawyers aren't going to start their own firm if they're making 15% less. They're going to allow their male colleagues to make 15% more than them. I don't believe that that's happening. And as soon as they found out that was the case, they would leave that firm. And this is the other thing. If you believe you're underpaid at your job, you have the ability to leave. Welcome to free markets. We don't need the government to step in. We already have, again, the law already exists. Equal Pay Act of 1963 says, let's pay everybody the same amount for the same amount of work done. But that doesn't mean everybody makes the same. That's a whole different thing. Okay, so then you come down in this, and they describe what it means, right? And then they say, okay, here's where an employer can get sued by an employee, right? The employer has all of the responsibility to do everything, right? So they're giving enforcement, right? So again, this goes to so if you're a libertarian, right, versus we're going to call it a socialist, right? We go, well, who has to deploy the military to enforce the rules? If I'm a libertarian and I go, let the free market decide, go. Zero requirement of enforcement. No officer showing up, no guns, no IRS, no one from the state to come and regulate my business. No one saying anything to me, right? And I'm not saying there's no role for government regulation. There is. However, it's constantly overstepped, and this is another one. Okay, so they get to create and administer a process to accept and mediate complaints to provide legal resources concerning alleged violations, right? And to promulgate rules for this purpose, right? So, a person aggrieved by a violation may commence a civil action no later than 2 years after. So, this gives an employee the right to sue an employer. I'll tell you what's not in this bill as you go through it. So they can tell you how much you can be fined as the employer, right? They tell you that it is the employer's responsibility to maintain all of these records to show why anybody is paid differently. And now, let's just talk about some examples of why one employee might be paid more than another employee. That has nothing to do with gender, right? But may actually have to do with which gender prefers which thing. Okay, so for example, right, let's say the shifts, right, because this is exactly what is shown in this study, right? Shifts matter. Okay, so if someone is willing to work a different shift, and they actually did provide for that in the Colorado law, shifts can have a pay disparity, right? But what about just flexibility in general, right? What about an employee who, I'll give you an easy example. We deal with shipping a lot, right? So let's just say the truck that's coming to pick up the shipment going out is late, and somebody has to stay late, right? And this happens, let's just say, once a week, right? And it's not like sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 10 minutes, whatever it is, right? And I have a female employee and a male employee. Well, the female employee might say, I have to pick my kids up at 4, I have a hard deadline, I cannot ever stay, right? And I have a male employee who goes, I'm more flexible than that, and I'll stay when needed to wait for the truck. Okay. From an employer perspective, there is a value-added proposition for someone who will take overtime shifts when there's extra work, for someone who can stay late when needed, for someone who has a more flexible schedule. That does not mean that I am paying them more for the same amount of work. That means that I am paying them more for their ability and willingness to do more work when it's required, right? Versus someone who might have to take care of children who might not be able to do that. Now, should we compensate parents for taking care of children is a different societal discussion, but that is not an employer's responsibility. How can it be, right? We're already, as employers, responsible for withholding your taxes, paying for health insurance, paying for retirement plans, paying for Social Security and Medicare for all employees, paying for unemployment insurance, paying for workers' compensation insurance. And I'm going to show you all those costs are going up. Right, so now I have to deal with the fact that I might be sued by any employer, any employee at any time for their belief that they got paid less for doing the work. And it is my responsibility to defend myself, right? And so then they say, well, what happens, right? Legal equitable relief, right? Oh, so the employee's reasonable costs, including attorney fees, right? Well, what happens if an employee is just disgruntled and upset and sues me as the employer for doing nothing wrong? I prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I did not pay anybody any different for doing the same amount of work. And why would I? It's bad internal policy. It's bad for employee morale. If somebody knows they did the exact same job and got paid less than somebody else, of course they're not going to be happy about it, right? And therefore, they're probably going to go look for another job, which as an employer costs you potentially a good employee, right? So there's no incentive in the business marketplace for employers to treat employees poorly. But because we're under this illusion that there is this wage gap that's already been disproved by Harvard in a perfect study, in a perfect environment that is showing that it is the choices of the employees that make the wage gap difference. Not that the pay is any different. Not that the opportunity is any different. Because this is the difference of what we're talking about in America right now. Right? It is the quality of opportunity versus the equality of outcome. And as we try to legislate equality of outcome, there are very, very, very negative consequences because you will take away the incentive for people to do more. And once you take away that incentive, our prosperity will go away. I talked recently about 10 global trends every smart people should know. An excellent book that I highly recommend. It's a coffee table book. Get it, share it with your friends. Please pass that one along. These are good global trends. The world is a much better place than Americans think. We're often pessimistic. One of the things that in there is we are eliminating global poverty. We are doing that via capitalism, via free markets. Now, that does not mean all of what's going on in America is free market capitalism. It's not. There's plenty of crony stuff. I talk about that all the time, too. But the laws that get created like this that go against what the data actually says are detrimental to everybody, right? So here's detriment number one. Corporations won't hire remote workers in Colorado. Why? Because we created a stupid law that was completely unnecessary, that's based on flawed data, on an assumption that's not actually true, right? That's the real status, right? Their findings. 86 cents on the dollar compared to men who work full time. No, it is not the same job. It is not 86 cents on the dollar. It is the same amount of money for the same amount of work done. Men are just working more. That is what the data shows. Okay? So the data shows that. Like, there's no doubt about that. Okay, now, are there going to be small differences in pay for, again, flexibility? Right? Other things that you can't quantify. How about attitude? And this could work either way. We always make this assumption that if it's going to go one way, it's always bad. This is only going to help women, right? There's no way that a male employee can sue me, except for they can't. Because let's just say a woman shows up every single day. Let's say the woman has no kids, takes every shift, stays late for everything that's needed, and also has a great attitude at work every day, right? And she's got the same exact title as the other guy that works next to her who won't do any of those things. Let's say the role is reversed, and I pay the woman more. Now, that male employee can come sue me for him not willing to do all of those things. That's what that law says. It doesn't say only women can sue. It says any employee who feels like they got paid less than an employee of the other sex is entitled to compensation. And this gives no room for nuance. No room for an employer to say, hey, you make the workplace a better place. And therefore I'm going to pay you more because that is a valuable service to all of us. You always pick up the trash and take care of things after company events and do all of the extra things that aren't within your job description, but you just do anyway. Oh, so now because I haven't documented that part of the job description, if I pay you more, now I can get sued. It makes no sense. And this is the thing that government does. It now requires businesses do more things, right? When already we're doing a lot of things. All right, and here's what kind of brought this to a head just for me immediately. I mean, first of all, it seems completely stupid that remote workers in Colorado get disqualified from jobs until you go look at the law and you go, yeah, well, I wouldn't want to comply with this either if I didn't have to. Now it looks like I have to, so now I'm going to have to write up specific job descriptions and salary ranges for all of the things and write out all the descriptions of why I'm paying somebody more, and all of that takes me more time and takes away from me actually doing business. This is called administrative overhead requirements that reduce the number of jobs created. And let me tell you something about jobs. Joe Biden gets up there and says, jobs, 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 jobs. Well, guess what? Government cannot create jobs. They can hire people and pay them, but that's not creating a job. That's just paying somebody. Where'd you get the money to pay them? You had to tax somebody else. Who'd you have to tax? People in the private sector who actually do the work. So it's private sector employees that make the whole thing happen, that create prosperity for everybody. That is clear and no argument about that, right? And if you want to see how it works differently, feel free. Please go immigrate to Russia or some other, or Venezuela or another communist country where they're going to tell you what your job is and how much you make. You get none of these rights. So there's so many rights that we already have that are a fair marketplace. All right, so then what? Then employers have to deal with the cost of these things. Well, the more employers have to deal with the cost of these things, the more they're going to try and get rid of employees or eliminate diversity. Okay, so because this is always the thing with a protected class, right? So now we have a protected class. That protected class is anyone of any sex getting paid anything they think they deserve more, right? So we can't imagine how this could possibly go wrong, and people could sue employers they're just pissed at because they left, right? And there's no consequence for the employee suing the employer. The employer has to pay their legal bills, and if the employee wins, then they pay everything. But if the employee loses, then what? Are they compensating the employer back for their illegal time and all of their sunk costs? No. Nothing for the employer. Zero protections for the employer. So why do I want to hire more people? And why do I want to create a diverse workforce when all that does is allow me to be sued more? Right? So every time you create a protected class, that means that protected class can sue the employer. Which means we're left with one unprotected class. Pretty much white male men. Which actually, then there's an incentive for every business to hire white male men because they can't be sued by them. Which actually, ironically, is a reason to pay them more because you can't get sued by them. Absolutely ridiculous. And again, employers are left to try and figure out how to deal with these laws, of which they don't define out. And I'm pretty positive that almost every senator behind this, and I don't have the time to go look up all of their records and legal history and what they do, but I would guess that the majority of these senators and representatives have never run a small business, and therefore do not understand what they're actually doing. And obviously, they read one article by the Women's Policy Research and Women's Foundation of Colorado, don't bother to even go look at something put out by Harvard, right, where there's an actual data set that proves demonstratively, right? And here's the end piece of this. Analyzing two policy changes, we demonstrate that while reducing schedule controllability can reduce the earnings gap, it can also make workers, particularly female workers, worse off. Read that again. Trying to institute these changes in policies can make the women workers worse off. Laws of unintended consequences. And I would bet that most of these senators, when they signed off, and these representatives, they believe they're trying to do a good thing. And they don't understand the laws of unintended consequences and what those might be. And they didn't come to the business community and ask enough of us, hey, what are the potential downsides of this? Right? And where is the protection for the employer? The employer documents it. The employee sues me anyway because they're just pissed off that I fired them because they're incompetent. They claim I paid them less. I paid them less because they weren't getting their job done. Now it's on me to prove that. So I have to prove that they were incompetent, that I fired them for cause. Oh, and I have to do that for unemployment too, by the way. And then I have to come back, pay the legal bills for the case. And then if I win, I get zero. I'm going to tell you the conclusion that leads me to. Robots. Get more robots to do the job so I don't have to deal with the people, because then I don't have to deal with the laws regarding the people. Meanwhile, employers are already getting taxed, right? So this is the piece that kind of brought these two together, which for me, I basically got them kind of within a day or two of each other. And I was like, wait a minute. On the one hand, I'm getting a price increase and I got to pay for all this unemployment money. And now on the other hand, I got to deal with potentially all of these things from somebody feeling like they didn't get paid the same. without having to prove anything, and it's my responsibility to do all the proof and all the documentation and tier class everybody, which gives less flexibility to employees, which just kills nuance in the which is my prerogative to have nuance. It is my prerogative to pay people different wages because they do different things that I don't have to write down. But now it's not. Now I have to write all those things down. Now I have to put in writing why any employee in any place is getting paid less than somebody else doing what they equate as the equivocal job. So I basically have to document why it's not the exact same job. That's irritating. Meanwhile, I now get to pay for the unemployment system, right? And not only do I have to pay for the unemployment system, but here's the little nice piece that they like to leave out. Oh, and that came in this email, which was fascinating because this email was so crazy in terms of all the different things that are in here. So the state of Colorado sent out their latest employer update to all of the employers for what's going on with unemployment. Well, this is the big one for me, upcoming premium increases. Okay. So you have a rate that you pay, and last year, here was the minimum tax wage base. So they're going to increase the tax wage base by 50%, right? And which means we're going to pay 50% more in taxes for each employee to provide unemployment benefits. Yeah, so when you think that those unemployment benefits are all free, they're not. They're paid by employers, which means what? If I have to pay that cost of that employee, I don't pay that employee as much money, right? This goes with all the costs employers typically pay, which workers seem completely unaware of all the time. But they're paying half of your Social Security Medicare payment for your retirement. They're also making contribution usually to your 401k plan. Oftentimes we're doing benefits for health care and other benefits that affect everybody. Now we're going to have family leave payments that we're also going to pay for. Now we have unemployment. We also have workers' comp. So by the time you add all of that up, typically that's about 40% additional costs for each employee based on their salary. So if you take your salary number, your employer's cost for you is 40% more than that. Multiply that number times 1.4. And that is typically your employer's cost to have you. Now, if we didn't have to pay as the employer all of these costs to government, then you, the employee, would probably get that 40% more because the cost is the same, right? So all of these costs just keep adding to what it costs to have an employee. Well, what does that mean for businesses? We want to have fewer and fewer and fewer employees because of all of these additional costs, right? I mean, that's just easy, simple math, right? That's just what it works out to be. So employers have to pay all of these additional costs because the UI trust fund, i.e. what the employers have paid in, right? Before the pandemic, we had a positive balance of $1.2 billion. Not only is that balance now zero, but they've also just borrowed another billion, and they're still paying, right? So when the federal government says, oh, great, we're going to extend benefits, well, great, who pays for them? Well, the federal government pays for the extra part, but who pays for the original part? That's employers. That's your boss pays that, right? When you get laid off, how many employees, when they get laid off, say, hey, boss, I'm sorry that you had to fire me. I realize there's no business because the government shut us down. But I'm really grateful that you paid that unemployment money to me because if you hadn't, then I wouldn't get unemployment insurance. And I'm grateful for that unemployment money. No one ever says that to the employer. Never happens, right? Monthly, every time or quarterly, we have to pay these bills. No one ever says, hey, boss, appreciate you picking up that unemployment tab so that if business goes south and we get laid off, we're covered and we still get a good chunk of our paycheck for 6 to 9 months. No one ever says that to the employer. This goes unnoticed. And not only do we have to pay for our employees for what they got, but now we're going to have to pay for all of the fraud cases that the government paid out for. Where's the accountability for that piece? And so this article, this that I got from them, this is their unemployment insurance and work refusals. So first they have this work refusal thing, which is become a snitch on your employees. Talk about a way to have a really crappy relationship with your employees. Tell on the ones who have been given an incentive by the government to stay home instead of working that you're going to tell on them. Oh yeah, that's going to do really well for you. What a terrible thing. This tattletale business that we've gotten into is terrible. You know. All right, Colorado Jumpstart. Oh, a return to work incentive. Great. Which sounds nice, except for the other piece of that needs to be we're just stopping unemployment benefits because we have enough jobs. People just don't want them because they've been given an incentive not to work. And I don't blame anyone who's not working, who makes more money on unemployment right now than not working. I would do the exact same thing. Government creates perverse incentives. People react. This is exactly what I'm talking about across the board today, is government makes one action, doesn't realize unintended consequences. When you pay people more to stay at home than they made working, they're not going back to work. Oh, now we're supposed to report and track fraudulent claims. Oh, because so many have been done and the state paid out so much. And again, I as the employer have to pick up this tab. How fair is that? It's not. Oh, we've got a new one. Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. So who's gonna pay for this? Oh, that's right, the employers. Employers are going to start paying this out, right? So as of January 1, 2024, it starts getting paid. I'm sure this will have all sorts of additional unintended consequences because, again, it's free money. You're going to incentivize everybody to take it, right? So paid family and medical leave, everyone's going to figure out what the rules are on this, and this is going to make it another problem for employers. And here's another reason you might pay somebody more, right? How about how many sick days they take every year? I.e., how much they show up to work. So if you don't miss any days, if you show up every day you're supposed to, only schedule your vacation and you're never sick, are you of the same value to your employer who has to cover all the shifts that a sick employee makes because they made poor health choices or they just call in sick? But now I'm not allowed to pay those employees anything different. And you would go, well, one might be their health, possible. And if that's genetic and you were born with that, I might have some empathy for that. But if you're not taking care of yourself and you get sick all the time because of that, that's your fault. Again, you didn't show up and do the same amount of work. If you're sick and don't plow your field and don't pick the weeds, your plants don't grow as high, your crop isn't as much. At the end of the year, farmers don't sit down and go, well, let's make it all even. There's no equality in that, right? We don't want this equality. Equality of outcomes is impossible. Because if I plant no crops, my neighbor plants 50%, my other neighbor plants 100%, and we all get a third of the total, what do you think is going to happen the next year? No one's going to plant anything. And this is the exact problem we have in America right now. We're in massive debts to foreign countries every month because we're not making things in America. We're just printing money and telling people to stay home, right? So here we go. More and more costs to employers, right? Upcoming premium increases. Guess what, employers? Your bill for every employee is going up, and your administrative cost for every employee is going up. And now your potential legal costs for every employer is going up. How is that going to end up in more employment? The unintended consequences of this are robots and people in Colorado can't apply for jobs because everybody else doesn't want to deal with our stupid laws. And what's most infuriating about this is instead of this article from Vice having any semblance of actually trying to get to some truth, it just says, oh, well, it's because companies are showing they would rather rule out job candidates than comply with laws intended to close pay gaps. Pay gaps don't exist. So laws to companies to force them to do things that don't exist are stupid, and employers are certainly not going to want to do them. And I know that's a completely libertarian policy, and I am not saying that in the past women haven't been paid less than men, but I'm saying we are close, really close, the closest we've ever been in history to equality of opportunity. And that is the goal. And now we're moving the goalpost to equality of outcome, which is impossible to achieve and has massively negative consequences. Now, this will tie in to all of the discussions and all of the things that I'm working on in terms of the biggest question we have going forward, which is, what is the role of government? And we are all either going to help limit the size of government so that these types of unintended consequences cease to be happening, or we're going to expand it to the point that it's going to suffocate all the prosperity that we've got, and it's going to be misery in America for a good while. That's all I got today. Thanks for listening. Please pass this along. Please think about these things. Please look at this data. And if I'm wrong, please come back and let's have a discussion and show me specifically the data of where I'm wrong, how these policies will be implemented, and how they will actually help people. Because all I see here is unintended consequences, and it's already begun. Remote employers don't want to hire Coloradans. That's not good for Coloradans. Thanks. Talk to you soon.